Hello, welcome to your big creative life. Welcome to an episode that is gonna get a little personal. I'm gonna get into it, but I've had this in the back of my mind for a while because it is a really big component of your big creative life, like making this decision on if you want to have kids or not. First of all, I want to say, in case you are in this place of struggling and wrestling and really not being sure, that is okay. When I was on the fence and I really wasn't sure, I felt like it was almost shameful to talk about that because so often people who have known their whole lives that they want to be parents talk about it as this thing that you just know. Like it's either a hell yes, and if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. And yeah, I just felt kind of like this guilt and shame for even wrestling with it. And I thought that, well, if I'm not 100% sure yet, like, does this mean that I'm just not meant to be a parent? Does this mean that this is no? Uh, I really wrestled with a lot of that, and I felt kind of embarrassed to talk about it with people. So if that is you, it is okay to wrestle with it. It is okay to not be sure. This is a big life decision. Like it's in some ways, I think it's really good that I wrestled with it because it shows that I wasn't just deciding randomly and like, well, okay, I guess I'll have kids because that's what, society unfortunately still expects the default to be for people. I'm glad that I wrestled with it and got to a place where ultimately I decided it was something that I really wanted. So just to say that, it's okay that you're in that place. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. It says nothing about you as a person. It says nothing about what kind of parent you're going to be if you do eventually decide to have kids. And if not, if you end up deciding that you're meant to be child free, that's fabulous and amazing. I have always said when I talk about this, which I've talked a little bit about this on social media before, that I could always see two versions of my life. I could see a version of my life where I had one or two kids and I was very happy with Sam, my husband, and fulfilled and content. And I could also see a version where we didn't have kids and I was very happy and fulfilled and content. So this was never something that I felt like I absolutely have to do above all else, or else my life will not be complete. I never had that strong of an urge. Not that, I definitely had a strong urge and it was something that I wanted for sure. And I am going to talk a little bit about our journey to getting to this point. And there is going to be a little bit of discussion of infertility. So just a heads up, if you are navigating that right now or you don't want to hear about that, just want to give you a little warning. It's a big decision. And so my own kind of journey of I'll share my journey of getting to the point where I decided that yes, this is something that I wanted, and I'll also give you some tips of some things that helped me decide. When I was a kid, I thought in a vague way it'd be fun to have a really big family. Both of my parents come from big families. Um, I grew up with two siblings. I have two younger brothers. My mom is the youngest of 14 kids, big farm, Midwestern farm family. And my dad is the third of 8 kids. And so growing up knowing that, I always thought, oh, it'd be so fun to have that many kids. Like it'd be just so fun to be in a house with that many people. Like I just thought that would be fun. But it was always in a vague sort of abstract, like, oh, wouldn't that be fun? And then I never really took it any further than that. Then when I got to college and throughout like basically all of my 20s, I was firmly had decided that I was not going to have kids. I didn't want kids. I didn't enjoy being around kids. I didn't enjoy babies. Nothing about that was appealing to me. In fact, if I could have made the decision, like a permanent decision to not have kids in my 20s, and actually gone through with it, I think I would have, because I was so sure that this was never going to change. I was so sure. And it was sure at that point because I was a very different person in my 20s. I was still actively drinking. And to be honest, I mean, I didn't acknowledge this to myself at the time, but I knew when I was still drinking that there was no way I could not drink for 9 months, like while I was pregnant. I just knew. So maybe that kind of factored into my decision as well, at least subconsciously. I never admitted that to myself, but that was a component of it. So when Sam and I started dating in my late 20s, I was 27, 28. I just turned 28 when we started dating. We, kind of talked briefly about kids, as you do when you're starting to date someone, and then definitely had more conversations about it as we got more serious. And I was like pretty against it, but there was a small opening that happened a small bit of possibility because of Sam. Because I finally was in a relationship with someone where I could see having kids with them. And I had never been in that type of relationship before where I felt that strongly about someone. I mean, I knew from the get-go that Sam was my person. I knew that that he was it. I just had a certainty about him and about us. I knew I was going to spend the rest of my life with him, like pretty early on. And I could see having a child with him. I could see that for the first time ever. It didn't mean I was committed, didn't mean I wanted to, but I could at least see it as a possibility because I knew he would be a good dad. And I knew that he was someone that I could partner with in this raising a child thing, and that he would be a good person. If I were ever going to do it, like he's the guy, right? So we got engaged, we got married when I was 31. And when we got married, we were both on the fence about it, which I think was important for us to be on the same page. If he had really strongly wanted kids or really strongly not wanted kids, that probably, would have had more influence and impact on my decision. But because we were both on the fence and we talked about it a lot, it gave me permission to really wrestle with it, which I think helped. And I basically struggled with it until, for several years, until we started trying when I was 33, maybe? Yeah, 33. So it took a while. And I remember reading things about motherhood and parenting and listening to podcasts about people talking about this exact thing. And I didn't feel like there were many things out there where people talked about wrestling with this. So that's partly why I want to do this episode, because I want to be bringing more awareness to that this is a fine thing to wrestle with. It's fine. You don't need to have any guilt or shame around this. So I listened to a lot of podcasts about parenting, but also pregnancy and birth, because that's something I was absolutely batshit terrified of. I was terrified of being pregnant and giving birth. And so I gathered all this data. And the other thing that I did, which is actually my first tip, is to I really looked at the people in my life who had kids, especially people who were newer parents, they had babies or toddlers or kids under 5. So they were kind of newer in the whole parenting thing. I looked at what people were doing. I clocked it and I made notes to myself. Okay, who is doing this in a way that I find appealing and right and is similar to how I would want to do this in this situation in my brain, imaginary scenario where I have kids. And then who is doing it in a way where it's not appealing and attractive to me. And it's almost like I was trying it on for size and just sitting with it and imagining. And that is definitely something I recommend doing. The people in your life that you see, but then also, it can also be people online. If you don't really have a lot of people in your life that have kids, it can be people online. It could be people out in public. If you see a family, if you see a couple with a baby, or just a person with a baby, try it on. Look at what they're doing, what's appealing about it, what's not appealing. And for me, when I was in that just observation mode and kind of gathering data, I discovered that for me, what was appealing was moms who still worked and had a lot of ambition and a life outside of being a mom. Being a mom is a huge identity shift. And I think 4 months into being a mom, I still feel like I'm kind of coming to terms with this identity shift. It is massive. And I don't judge anyone who is in it so 100% that that's all they want to do is be a mom and be present for their kids and nothing else. And that's their main identity. Great. That's totally fine. For me, just again, my own experience, I knew that I wanted, at least then when I was thinking, again, if I do have kids, I wanted to continue working. I wanted to still be able to work toward the big things that I wanted to work towards, my dreams, my goals, and to make sure that I had a really rich life outside of being a mom. That was very important to me. And so I looked at people who were doing that and doing that in a way that I found attractive, because the more that I saw evidence of that, the more that I saw hey, this is possible to do this, the more appealing the idea of having a kid became, because I could see how it would fit into my life. I could see how Sam and I would do it. And yeah, that was appealing to me. The next tip that I have, and the thing that I did that helped as well, is to really visualize your life in 10, 15, 30 years out? Like what do you envision? And it's totally fine to not have specifics. I certainly don't have a lot of specifics. I have some general things that I imagine will happen when I don't know, or things that I want when I'm 50 or when I'm 60 or 43 or whatever. I'm 37 now. But thinking about my life at these different milestones and what's in my life at that point. And I did some meditation, I did some visualizations thinking about my older self. And in a lot of those, I did feel a sense of like, oh, I have a child in these like visions in this meditation where I would think about my future self. There was a child there. I knew nothing else about this. I didn't picture what they looked like. I didn't picture their gender. I didn't picture anything else. Just this kind of feeling that my future self had, that there was a child in my life. I didn't even know how many, maybe 1, 2, 3, I don't know. But I realized through doing that and really sitting with that okay, that this is actually something that I see myself doing. Because when you go through this exercise, it helps you realize like you are not making the decision on whether to have a baby. You are making the decision on whether you want to become a parent, and if that is going to be a big component of your life. That's something important to consider. And I feel like there's so much attention on the baby stage because it's crazy, it's chaotic, it's again that huge identity shift. But I had to sit and think about myself with an 8-year-old and with a 13-year-old and with a 24-year-old child, kid, adult, whatever. Is this something that I would want to do? And what would my life look like? Now, of course, there's no certainty. Of course, I think that's why I didn't get specific with it. I wasn't saying like, oh, I imagine my child coming home from college I didn't imagine any specifics. So try that out, like get quiet, think about your future self, think about the goals and dreams and what you want your life to look like. And this is going to vary obviously depending on your age and, but I think that's a helpful exercise outside of having kids, just thinking about what you want in your life, but also this decision on whether to have kids. Yeah. The third thing I will say is it is okay if you are never fully 100% on that hell yes side of the spectrum. When I was 33 and we started, we were like, okay, let's try this, let's do it. I think I was surprised that I didn't have baby fever, that there was no biological urge that I felt to have children, because I'd been primed by society that this is something that women experience, especially when they're over 30, a biological clock is ticking, like, come on. Some people talk about that, this like sudden, it's like a switch just gets flipped and all of a sudden they're like obsessed with babies and becoming a mom and stuff. And that does happen to some people, but that never happened to me. I'm 37. I've had a child. I still just have never had that. So if you don't have that, that is not a sign that you are not meant to have kids or meant to have kids or anything. That's not a component of it that you should really give a lot of weight to. It's because just don't wait for that to be an indicator of whether you should do this or not. And you know what? I'm actually gonna share one other thing that helped me make the decision, because it's and again, this is personal. This is just my own experience, but it is a big component of it that I want to be honest about. I did not want to be, when I thought about my life in 5 years, not or 10 years, like not way down the road, but like 5 or 10 years, when I started doing these visualizations and really thinking about it, I was still working my corporate job. I was working at this law firm, and I saw some of my coworkers who were parents, especially to multiple kids, who would have to leave and go right to band practice or soccer practice and do this and do that and shuffle their kids around, and they'd have to, take PTO because their kid was sick and they needed to juggle this. And I don't want it to sound like I'm judging them. I just knew that was something that was not appealing to me. Not necessarily the shuffling kids around to sports practices, like that's fine, but it was just juggling the corporate 9 to 5, and that felt like my heart just sank when I looked at that. And for me, at the time I was, working on building up my editing business. I was still doing it part-time. It was a side hustle. And I just really knew that I wanted to be able to quit my job before I had a baby, or at least be working towards it, even if I wasn't fully able to quit my job yet by the time we had a child, because I was 33 when we started. And if I would have gotten pregnant right away, I still would have been working that corporate job, but at least I would have been making steps towards quitting my job. So I felt like that was a dream that I had that I couldn't put on hold or push to the side to have a baby. I couldn't sacrifice that. I wasn't willing to sacrifice that to stay in this corporate job that I really didn't love, just for the security of it and be like, well, whatever, it is what it is. I was not willing to do that. So that felt like an important thing for me to cross off. So I guess with sharing that, I'll say for you, if you are wrestling with it, this isn't a case where you have to cross off every single thing that you want to do off your list. You have to do this and this, because you're never going to travel again. You're never going to have freedom to do this. That's not what I'm saying. It's more just that was a big dream that I had for my life, was to be able to quit my job. And I had to at least be working towards that in order for me to feel comfortable and like I was ready to have a child. So that's something to consider too. Are there big things that you want to accomplish before you do this that you haven't done yet? And it can be easy to push this decision or this goalpost of kids off because, you have to get this milestone hit, you have to save up this much money, you have to. And the reality is, kids are going to kind of disrupt your life, even if you prepare and you have all your ducks in a row. So I don't think it's a case of needing to get everything perfectly squared away before you do this. But in my case, that was something that I definitely had to cross off the list. We started trying 4 years ago, and I will be honest with y'all, I was not fully ready. I think when we started, when we made this decision, I think I was 90% ready, but there was still this tiny part of me that was like, am I going to regret this? Because it's so hard. It's so hard to picture what your life is going to be like if you do have a kid, because you don't know how you're going to feel. You don't know what your baby's going to be like. You don't know how, if there are going to be health challenges. You don't know how your partner's going to adjust to it. You can't picture what your routine is going to be like. All of this stuff is just, there's no way to prepare for it really, because you don't know what it's going to be like. You don't know what you're going to be like once you become a parent. So, there was that 10% of me that was scared and just not fully sure. Yeah. Now, we did have a few years of struggling to get pregnant, and, we got this diagnosis of unexplained infertility, which basically just means they can't find a reason why you are having trouble getting pregnant. They ran all the tests, everything was fine on Sam and I, and it just wasn't happening. So we did end up going through IUI and then one round of IVF. And we made the decision with IVF that if it worked, great, we would be parents. And if not, we would do one round. That's all we could do financially. And that was it. That was the end of the road. If it wasn't successful, then we would just take that as a sign, I guess, that we were not meant to be pregnant. That was kind of how we worked through it, just ourselves. And by the time we got to that point of doing IVF, I was a lot more sure, because I'd had, 2 years or so of trying to get pregnant and thinking about it and going through the roller coaster of every month, oh, nope, not pregnant again. So I went through that emotional roller coaster of up and down where I didn't know if it was going to happen. I couldn't really plan things, and it was really hard. And so going through that process definitely pushed me further into oh no, this is actually something that I really want, and I'm going to be really sad if it doesn't work. I would still be fine. Again, I could picture a version of our life where we didn't have a child and we were both fine, but it would really have to grieve it, and it was something that I wanted. And I just had this sense too that Sam and I would be good parents, not perfect parents, but I worked through a lot of my stuff, my own trauma from childhood, and worked through some mental health stuff. I felt like I was in a good place. He was in a good place. We were in a good place together. And I just felt like we would be pretty decent parents if we got the chance to do it. And thankfully, it worked. We did one round of IVF. We had one embryo that made it through. And that's my daughter. That's Audrey. She's 4 months old now. And it's I think to sum up my parenting experience so far and how I feel about it is I have been pleasantly surprised and delighted by how much I enjoy it. I don't feel like I lost myself at all. I feel completely like my pre-baby self, except there is a component of me that is so focused on her and in love with her, and I don't know, there's room in my brain now for her and my heart and my life, but I don't feel like a radically different person. I still want the same things for my life. I'm still striving towards the same things, you know. I still have the same interests and hobbies. It's just, I'm like kind of obsessed with her right now because she's 4 months old and she's so stinking cute. And she's starting to engage a lot more. She's like blowing raspberries and she's starting to half laugh. She does this like half chuckle thing and she's smiling a lot. It's the best. But yeah, I don't feel like a radically different person. And that was so terrifying to me before I had kids. Again, I was just worried I'd become this different person, that I wouldn't recognize myself, and it was scary. So maybe that gives you some hope if you're on the fence, that you can, you know, kind of be the same person while also having space in your heart and your life and your mind for this baby, for this child, and this like unconditional, all-consuming love that you feel. Yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised. I did have some postpartum anxiety, and you know, I had a difficult birth and a recovery. It was we had an unplanned C-section. So the first month especially was very hard, like harder than I expected, but I'm in a good place now. Again, she's 4 months, and I just feel like I've even said to Sam a few times, like, I'm so happy that we decided to do this. And I'm so happy that it worked, because so many people have infertility, they've got fertility struggles, they do IVF and it doesn't work. And I just feel so lucky and blessed that we are at the place that we're at. Like, I don't take that for granted, because I know there's so many people who want to be parents and just for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. So yeah, I never want to take this for granted, and I'm so grateful, and I'm so happy that we did it, that we decided to go for it. And again, it's only been 4 months, you know. I have no idea what the future holds for us and for me as a mom, as a parent. Again, I'm still very much like coming to grips with this new part of myself and this identity, because it's been a big shift, but it also just feels right. Yeah, it feels right in a way that I can't really explain. If you have questions, or you want to hear more about my experience, the things that helped me, you know, I'm happy to talk about this. You can always DM me anonymously. I won't, like, you know, share your message or anything on Instagram at the Katie Wolf. And also, I've been thinking about doing an episode. Okay, I'm also just going to really quickly summarize my birth story, my birth experience, because I got a question on Instagram on an Ask Me Anything that I did about it, and I was like talking to some people, and I don't know, I just feel like I wanted to share it, but I wasn't sure how to do it. And you know, a lot of people don't follow me for like my pregnancy and birth content. They follow me because I talk about writing. But fuck it, if you don't want to hear about my birth story, totally fine, you can just stop the episode now. But if you're curious and you want to hear about it, you can keep listening. And it is, again, just a little content warning that it does contain like an unplanned C-section. It was difficult, so if you're not in headspace to hear about it, just cut the episode off right here. So I was induced at 39 weeks because I was over 35, and because we did IVF. We, you know, my doctor and I talked about it and decided that that was what we were going to do. And I was so done being pregnant. I was just really struggling at the end. I like was not sleeping. I was physically having I was uncomfortable. And I was ready. It's like, yeah, let's do this. And I had also had false labor for like a few weeks before that, where I would have contractions. And then sometimes, I think one night I had contractions for like 12 hours, but they never increased to the point where I had to go to the hospital. It just kind of stalled out. And so I was a wreck mentally. I was so anxious. I'm like, let's just do this. So we went in for an induction Saturday night, October 7th. That was my scheduled date. And went in at 5 p.m. and got everything set up and started on Pitocin, which is a drug that kind of helps you start contractions. It kind of speeds things along. And I was 1 centimeter dilated. So before you can push, before you can actually start to deliver the baby, your cervix has to be 10 centimeters dilated. So you can be at 0 centimeters or you can be 10. And I was at 1. So I was just starting to dilate, to open up a bit, but I wasn't very far along. And so we did Pitocin, and we also did, what's the other drug? I'm forgetting a drug. It helps your cervix open. I can't remember what it's called now. Maybe I blocked it out. But I started having contractions like almost immediately with the medication, and they were intense. And I've always heard that contractions on Pitocin are more intense. I don't know if that's true or not, because this has been my only birth. This is my only experience with it, but they were really intense. So I got the epidural we started the medication, everything around like 7:45, and I got the epidural around 12:45. So I'd labored about 5 hours. I got to like 4 centimeters, I think, and was like, I need the epidural. Like, I can't do this. I hadn't slept really the night before because I was just really thinking about the induction. I was kind of anxious. And I knew that if I wanted to get any sleep that night, I would have to be comfortable. And I was hoping that the epidural would allow me to do that. Now, the epidural was my biggest fear about giving birth, which might sound crazy because you're pushing a baby out of you. But I was terrified of the epidural. The thought of a needle near my spine made me crazy. But I just was like, I talked to my brother who's a doctor. I talked to my doctor. I read information about it. I talked to people who had epidurals, and I just decided that's what I wanted. I didn't want to do a natural birth. So I got the epidural, and actually getting it was okay. It was anxious. I was anxious, but it was fine. But what ended up happening is the epidural didn't really work. It worked for maybe like 30 minutes at a time. And what happens when you have an epidural is they have to rotate you from side to side so that you're not on one side too long. So I would be like lying on my left side, and then 30 minutes or 45 minutes later, the nurse would come over and I'd have to rotate over to my right side. And you just have to be moved periodically. And they have to help you because you're numb from, the waist down essentially, or you're supposed to be. And I was not. It dulled the contractions, and I would have periods where it would work for like 30 minutes at a time, and then it would wear off. And they kept upping it, and they kept, they increased my Pitocin to try to move me along faster, and then my heart rate started to drop. So every time they would up the medication, my heart rate would drop. So then they would have to decrease the medication and give me some other medication to make my heart rate come back up. So they were monitoring me all night and kind of playing this game, doing this dance of trying to get me comfortable, but then also trying to prevent my blood pressure from going down even more. So I didn't get any sleep, like at all. And I did the Foley balloon, which is this balloon that they put inside of your cervix, and then just to help it along. And anyways, I progressed pretty quickly to like 7 centimeters, I think. And then it took a while to get to from 7 to 10, like the whole next day, all of Sunday, I was just laboring. Yeah. And still getting some relief. Like, I think the epidural definitely took the edge off, but it was not pain-free. I could definitely feel contractions. I could move my legs. So by the time I got to 7 p.m. the next night, so like over 24 hours later, I finally was at 10 centimeters. I was ready to push. And I was actually excited by that point because I'm like, oh, finally, like I'm ready. I'm done. I'm so done mentally. I'm exhausted. I'm just ready to be done with these contractions. Like, let's go. And I pushed for 3 hours, just over 3 hours, which is a long time. It did not feel like 3 hours. It probably felt like an hour maybe. And how it works is every time you have a contraction, they tell you to push, and you do 3 pushes. So Sam was holding my hand. I was holding these grips, and he would, I would feel contraction coming on because the epidural wasn't really working. So I could feel it coming. And on the monitor that I was hooked up to, they could see I was starting to have a contraction. So then it would be like, okay, let's go. And I would take a deep breath and I would push, and he would count to 10. And then I would release. And then I would do another push. He would count to 10. I would release. And we did that 3 times. And then I would have like a 30-second or a minute break because the contractions were coming so quickly. And yeah, it felt good to have something to focus on. And I really didn't mind pushing as much as I thought I would. Like it wasn't, yeah, I was just ready to move things along. So then after 3 hours, my doctor was like, she's really kind of stopped progressing. She's not really moving any further down, and her heart rate is also starting to increase. So I think we kind of have to call it. And what ended up happening is her head position was just, her head was positioned in a way that made it difficult for her to come out vaginally. So her head was lifted up a little bit, like her chin was lifted, like she was looking up. And the doctor said, if this was your second baby, third, fourth, etc., if you had given birth before, then you probably would be able to deliver her. But because this is your first, it's just, it just is not going to work. We could have you labor forever, and you wouldn't be able to deliver. So we made the decision to do the C-section around like 10:15 or so. And everything happened really quickly. They wheeled me into the operating room. It's really bizarre because they put up a curtain so you can't see anything. Sam was there with me in scrubs and a mask and everything. And I felt some pressure down there, but I honestly thought they were just getting things ready. Like I didn't know that they were cutting me open and delivering Audrey at that point. I seriously thought they were just getting ready. And then, we heard a cry, and I was like, wait, that's it? She just was delivered? Like, holy shit. So the actual C-section was so quick. Like within minutes, she was out. But what happened is from a combination of, I think, the medicine and just adrenaline and hormones, I was shaking so badly. I was almost vibrating off the table. My entire body was shaking so horribly. That when they brought her out, they put her on my chest right away, which was really important to me. I wanted to have skin to skin. I wanted to have her on my chest, but I felt like I couldn't hold her because I was shaking so badly. I felt like it wasn't safe. So, and I was also so nauseous that I felt like I was going to throw up. So I said, I can't do this. And I was like crying, and, we got a really sweet picture. Like it was really, to capture the moment when she was placed on my chest, and Sam was right there. So like I'm glad we have that picture to capture that, but it was tough that I couldn't have that time with her. So they brought her over. Sam did the umbilical cord, cut that, and they got her weight, they checked her out, everything was fine. And then Sam took Audrey into the nursery so that they could kind of stitch me up and start my recovery. And they gave me some medicine because I still felt like I was going to throw up and I was still shaking so badly. They gave me a medicine that to help the nausea, but it made me so drowsy where I basically couldn't stay awake. So after I was, and everything went fine with the C-section. It was great. There were no complications. They wheeled me into the nursery so I could be with Sam and Audrey. And they put me, they kind of sat my bed up a little bit so I could hold her, but I was nodding off. I could not stay awake. So I was trying to breastfeed her, but I couldn't because I just could barely hold her. It was a mess. So, and I just passed out. I fell asleep because I couldn't stay up. So then I woke up in our recovery room, and from there things were okay. Like I got to hold her, we started breastfeeding, all that stuff. But it's like, on one hand, I'm so grateful that we had a good experience in terms of like, there were no complications. We had a great team. I loved my nurses. I loved my doctor even more after she delivered Audrey. It was a great experience that way. And I'm so freaking happy Sam was there by my side the whole time. Like, I don't know how I would have gotten through this without him. And another upside of it is that he got to bond with Audrey right away. Like, they got to have that time in the nursery. He gave her a bit of formula. So it was like they got to have time while I was kind of recovering. But it's hard. I kind of expected things to go a certain way. I never thought that I would have a C-section. And I didn't get to have that kind of bonding time right after she was born. And that was hard. It was hard that things didn't go the way I planned. And again, it's like, I'm so grateful that I'm okay, that she's okay, that everything went fine. But there was a bit of grieving that I had to do, that things didn't go the way I planned and that it was a lot harder than I expected. Breastfeeding was also really, really hard in the beginning, with like getting her to latch in the hospital. The physical recovery, oh my gosh, the first like 24 hours after a C-section, I mean, it's horrible. It's horrible. The pain and, having to have help to stand and shuffle to the bathroom. It just, yeah, there's a lot of physical recovery. But this is the wild thing too. I'll say one last thing about this. I'm glad that this happened when it did. I'm glad I'm alive in the time that I'm alive, because if this had happened, I don't know, 100 years in the past, I would not be here. I would not have survived. Andre wouldn't have either. So it's like, thank God for modern medicine and for the ability to do, C-sections so quickly. And so I don't want to say effortlessly, because it's a lot of effort, but yeah, I'm just grateful for modern medicine. I'm grateful I was in good hands. And, my mom was here when we got home. We stayed in the hospital for 2 nights and then came home. And so she was able to help me, a lot those first days with the recovery, and just help with, everything, because I couldn't really do much. I could walk a little bit, but that was about it. And yeah, so that's my birth story. I hope it's not too much of a downer, but I want to be honest. I remember when I was pregnant, I watched a lot of birth stories from people, like on TikTok and YouTube and stuff. And I only watched positive ones, which I think was the right decision. But in hindsight, I wish I would have kind of looked into C-sections more and just kind of been familiar with what happens and what the recovery is like. Because again, I just never thought I would have a C-section. But shit happens. If you're listening to this and you have decided to have kids and you're anxious about birth or pregnancy or whatever, your birth is not going to you can't predict how your birth is going to go. Not everything will go exactly the way that you plan. Even if you are a planner and a control freak like me, there's just no way. Stuff's going to happen. You can't plan for every little thing. You just can't. So the best advice I would have is to just go in with an open mind. Make sure that you have a good team around you, people that you trust, whether it's a midwife, a birthing center, doula, doctor, your partner, your mom, whatever. Just people around you that you trust. And also just know that if things don't go according to plan, it doesn't say anything about you or your body or your ability to birth a baby, none of that. I saw a lot of stuff online when I was pregnant about your body knows what to do, just trust your body. And I think that's true to a certain extent, but I trusted my body. My body knew what to do in terms of getting fully dilated with some help from the medication, obviously, but pushing, all of that. But yet my body couldn't fully push her out. And I didn't internalize that as oh, I'm a failure, or my body didn't do what it's supposed to. It's just, it says nothing about me as a person or my body. So I want you to remember that as well, because there can be a lot of rhetoric around oh, just, your body knows what to do. Trust your intuition. Women are made to do this. So I don't know. I think we need to take all of that with a grain of salt. But yeah, that's my birth experience. 4 months out now, I feel like I'm kind of, I guess, recovered from it. I can talk about it and not get emotional or feel a lot of really strong emotions about it. I'm just grateful that I have Audrey and that she's here and she's happy and healthy, and so am I. I'm 4 months in, 4 months out rather, and doing well. So I think that's important to kind of keep in mind too. Okay, that's my birth story, and a lot of information about whether or not you want to have kids. This might be one of my longest episodes, but thank you for listening or watching. I really appreciate it, and hope that this gave you some hope or some, help, I guess, when it comes to making this decision. So, all right, see you next time.